from. We are starting soon. I think in the next 2 minutes, we are going to hand it over to our Director of Research, Professor Paul Kamau, to open today's seminar. This is our first seminar of the year, and we're looking forward to a very good discussion. So Prof. Paul Kamau, please get ready in the next 1 minute.
Basil, can you see Kasuku? I don't know whether Kasuku, I can't see him yet, but he's
Not yet.
not yet.
I think we are good to go. I think we can start. We hope he's going to join us soon.
No, he will. He will definitely join us. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. I think Prof. Paul Kamau, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Pascaline, for starting us off on behalf of the Institute for Development Studies. I want to thank everybody for finding time to be here. As you've heard, my name is Paul Kamau, and currently serving as the Director of Research in the Institute for Development Studies. Institute for Development Studies is one of the premier research institutes within the University of Nairobi, where our core mandate is not only in teaching, but also to carry out research. In fact, at IDS, we spend most of our time in carrying out research, particularly in social science field. Doing research is one thing, and being able to share the results of a research with a great audience is an important and integral part of research. And it's for this reason that the Institute for Development Studies, popularly known as IDS, organizes bi-weekly seminars every Thursday afternoon on diverse topic, diverse presentation, just to give a platform for researchers to share their findings or even to share their thoughts of research. So it's not necessarily that we hold these seminars for completed research, even proposals or ideas that we have. As we all know, development studies is complex, multifaceted phenomenon that call upon not only social scientists, but also other disciplines to come together, think, and intervene for the well-being of the population. So IDS we open to listening from as many disciplines as possible. We don't close ourselves. We're not rigid. We open to any presentation. And as you can see in our presentation today, we will be talking about infrastructure and Africa. This is part of the Uli research seminars that have been going on from last year and spearheaded by our colleague here, Professor Winnie Mitula and Professor Fred Amonya, as a loose network of people who are thinking of how can we move the continent from its current state to a more improved or a better level, because we cannot develop without thinking about infrastructure. So the topic of today about the reality of complexity is very timely. This is our first seminar of the year, and therefore we are opening it with a lot of bang and energy, given the centrality of infrastructure. Many of us have moved or tried to move from one country to another in Africa. Sometimes you have to go to Asia in order to go to West Africa. You have to go to Europe. And this is just but part of the infrastructure that is needed for development. When we talk of infrastructure, there are many ways of looking at it. Could it be road network, railway, airline, electricity, communication that can bring people together? And therefore, we should not just think of one facet of infrastructure, but how can this complex system be brought together for the better outcome? Presenters and discussants will be talking to us about, led by Fred Amonya, and discussant Engineer Tom Opio and Dr. Sylvester Kasuku, under the moderation of Professor Winnie Mitula. Just to echo that when you look at the Africa Agenda 2063, infrastructure is very central. But what have we done about it? What are the plans? And in the Kenyan way is to ask, what have we set aside for the infrastructure development? So I want to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this session and to say that it's open, no idea is stupid. We all here to learn from each other. And therefore, feel free to air your views, to ask questions, to make comment, because that's the only way we can learn and grow. Thank you very, very much. Allow me to stop there. I think I had like 5 minutes, which are now gone. And request that my colleague, Professor Winnie Mitula, who is the moderator of the day, to take it up from there. But just to emphasize that these seminars on different topics will be happening every other Thursday. You're all invited. And when you give us your contact, especially for those who are joining for the first time, we will keep you posted in all topics that we are presenting so that you can join. I know sometimes it's too early to others, and others it will be too late. In Africa, or East Africa, is at 2 p.m., but we value your presence irrespective where you're joining us from. And we really appreciate those who have been very consistent and committed to this cause. I see a lot of familiar names and faces here. And on behalf of the Institute for Development Studies, allow me to really welcome you all and say we're looking forward to a very engaging and productive talk. Thank you very much. Over to Professor Winnie Mitula.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Kamau. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I can see we are just beginning and we are running at 75. Hopefully, more people will join us, but the number is not the issue. I think the issue we are handling is critical and is of interest to very many of us. Sometimes I wonder whether infrastructure is me or whether I am the infrastructure, because it's really part and parcel of our daily lives. You know, we wake up and you cannot literally do anything if there was no infrastructure. So we see is a critical area of focus that we need to be engaging on in Africa. Both scholars, practitioners, and even private enterprises should engage with this issue. And of course, we see a lot of debate about the gap, and our honorable speaker today doesn't like to hear about the gap. So he's going to really disrupt our thinking and our approaches by tweaking it around and even questioning whether the issues of quality, which continue to be on table, are the real issues, and whether Africa should continue engaging with issues of gap and quality when in reality they are not looking at what infrastructure does for ordinary citizens. The critical thing in development for us at IDS and at the University of Nairobi is people. People, peace, are very critical. If we don't have infrastructure, we will not have good environment for people. So we are happy to engage in this. And this is the first series, as has been said by my colleague, Professor Kamau. We intend to also look at the issues of domestic pool in the next coming series, money pools. We believe that there is domestic pool of money that could also support infrastructure and is not being effectively exploited as should be. We will also look at issues like the global money market. How does it work? How does it support? Is it relevant for us or not in the coming seminars? And we'll also look at issues of national planning as the last part of the series so that we can bring people on board that infrastructure is not delinked from the overall planning that we do on a daily basis. So that's where we are. I don't want to steal words from my colleagues. Who are very, very well equipped in this debate. Literally, each one of them has directly engaged with, is continually engaging with the issue of infrastructure in their world of work, in their world of scholarship, and in their world of consultancy. So we expect a lot of good discussion today. I will just give a brief of each one of them so that when we start engaging, we don't disrupt by knowing who is talking next. Our main speaker today is Fred Amonya, who is a honorary senior fellow and a fellow of complex systems and public investment. So very well pointed, University of Birmingham in the UK. For over 2 decades, Fred has peered into infrastructure and public policy across the world, and transport has had a special place for him. He led the governance theme of the UK development program called Global Transport Knowledge Partnerships that sought to bridge the chasm between policymaking and universities of Africa and Southeast Asia. Then, before COVID struck, for 4 years, he ran around the world as chair, Transport Systems Economics. He led policymakers and academics in attempting to understand transport investment in 122 countries by constructing their policy spaces as dynamical systems. He now focuses on the policy structures of Africa, assisting African governments imagine post-COVID world, and he's now helping steer dialogue on public-private partnerships as a member of UNESE team of PP's experts. Then he has also engaged with the World Transport Services to keep busy. He's a chartered engineer and a fellow of CIHT and holds a PhD in policy science, non-ergodic systems. He's in LinkedIn, so for some of you who are keen on his works, you can always visit his LinkedIn, FD Amonya at Birmingham, BHAAM, UK. That is our keynote speaker today. Then we'll have our first discussant, who is Tom Opio, Managing Director, Infrastructure, Transportation and Environmental Consulting. Tom Opio is a professional civil engineer with over 37 years experience in the field of highways and transportation engineering. He was a lecturer of transportation engineering at the University of Nairobi between 1996 and 2007. He has undertaken many transportation research projects and studies and implemented several transportation projects in Eastern, Central, and Southern African region. He has extensive experience in transport policies and strategies, transport infrastructure, feasibility studies, design, development and maintenance, public transport infrastructure and services, road safety, economic analysis and appraisal of infrastructure investments. He has undertaken several transportation consultancy projects with the World Bank, United Nations, European Union, the German KfW, and African Development Bank. Last but not least, we have our colleague again, Kasuku. Dr. Sylvester Kasuku is advisor, Governance Executive Office of the President, Kenya. Kasuku has over 24 years of experience in governance, transport policy, infrastructure, and services, service management policy. He has worked with the government, academia, and he still is working with academics and development partners. He is a PhD holder in planning, in planning, focusing on transport policy and climate change governance from the University of Nairobi. He's also well published and continues to lecture at the University of Nairobi. He currently sits as an advisor governance in the Executive Office of the President in Kenya, and has also served as Director General and Chief Executive of the LAPSET Corridor Development Authority between 2013 and 2021, where he led the planning, coordination, and implementation of LAPSET Corridor 7 infrastructure project components. Between 2008 and 2013, he was Secretary for Infrastructure and LAPSET Corridor Project at the Secretariat of the Office of the Prime Minister of Kenya. Dr. Kasuku also is a lecturer. I think I've read that. And then in December 2012, he was honored by the President of Kenya with an award of a Moran of the Burning Spear, MBS, for the distinguished service he has had in Kenya. Dr. Kasuku is a member of various professional societies, which include Fellow of Kenya Institute of Planners, a Fellow of Town and County Planners Association, Chartered Member of Institute of Logistics and Transport, and Corporate Member of Architectural Association of Kenya, Town Planning Chapter. Last but not least, is a registered physical planner by the Physical Planners Association Board. That's the team that is going to deliver today's engagement. So Fred, you jump on to the seminar by presenting, and then the two will follow. You have about 25 minutes, Fred, and then the rest will have about 10. If they trans a bit, 12 to respond. Fred.
Oh, this infrastructure gap, this gap thing. See, the notion is throw in some red meat to this gap. This red meat is called infrastructure, and coming out the other end will be very nice stuff. That is the thinking, and it's wrong. It's delusional. But thank you, IDS. IDS is a special place. The disposition of IDS to interdisciplinarity is a special thing, and we should go a long way in trying to make a difference in our time. We've got many leaders. We've got scholars, we've got leaders of government, we've got leaders of society in this meeting. But I'll pick up one person, and he's a young man. He's in Hong Kong, and his name is Ronald Lee. If you could allow Ronald Lee to say hello to this meeting, I would much appreciate. Can you let Ronald Lee in? Ronald, could you wave?
Team, go ahead.
Yes.
Hello, Dr. Ammonia. I'm Ronald. Thanks for inviting me to the meeting today, and I hope to learn something regarding the infrastructure, regarding the capacity in the infrastructure space, and get something back for me to continue my journey to look to this big picture.
Okay, Ronald, thank you. We didn't see your video though, but I wanted everyone to see your face. Don't worry.
I really turn on my.
Okay, yes. That is Ronald. Now let me tell you something about Ronald. Ronald is special to me because he's my mentee. Mentorship responsibility is a deep one. So Ronald, you've got to ask a few deep questions. Don't let me down. No pressure. Okay, we are done with that.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, let's do a bit of ice breaking. And thank you, Winnie, for that introduction. Let's do a bit of ice breaking. I already opened by talking about infrastructure gap, and let me say that I miss Raila Odinga. We were making some progress in bringing this problematic narrative to an end. We must all miss Raila Odinga. Okay. That is RVR. 3 decades lost. because we didn't understand complexity. And this program called Structural Adjustment Program of the 1990s didn't help us. We lost 3 decades. Right, that is the Maputo corridor. What happens when politics is able to muzzle us to a direction of progress? That's the Maputo corridor. That is my country, Kampala, before and after COVID. Now, look at that, the serenity of the COVID time. Why did we waste COVID? I was asking APRM in November last year that question in Kigali, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism. Why did we waste COVID? That is the big, it's not the big deal. It's supposed to be the big dig. It's not the big deal. It's the big dig. That is the tunnel under Boston. In the 1950s, everybody celebrated the sight of traffic. It took less than a generation for people to say, no, we don't want this thing. Then they had to push everything under. Los Angeles, they thought they're solving a problem. They created more problem. The problem of traffic in Los Angeles. HS2, near me here, delusion of CBA, cost-benefit analysis, and just a failure to appreciate, to understand infrastructure and its complexity. Okay, that was a nice break. I think we're now awake. A bit of housekeeping, because we are going to look into some rather deep territory. Now, rocks, elephants, dogs, and we. Rocks, elephants, dogs, and we are defined by 3 things: presence, duration, and difference. Those 3 are true of rocks, elephants, dogs, and we humans. There is something there. Whether we're talking about humans or rock, it persists, this duration, and it changes, this difference. Now, the next question we must ask, so what separates the rock from we humans and dogs and elephants? The difference is we are able to internalize, to look into difference. We are able to look into difference. So if dogs, humans, and elephants are able to do that, why are humans special then? What makes the human being special then? And the reason is this. While dogs and elephants can look into difference, they can respond to difference, we can externalize the generator of difference. That is why we're here. We're here trying to ask what's going on. Dogs are not here. Elephants are not here. And that is what is special. Let's take note of that. It's not that they don't have consciousness. Elephants do. But there's something special. There's a higher degree, a higher level of consciousness in human beings. And that is the central problem in this thing we call complexity. So we are our own problem because we look at the generator of change, and change changes who we are. And that is a problem. Right. Why is it a problem? We humans have sought to understand deep the world around us. Ask why. That Socratic question, why? But it took us nearly 2,000 years for us to pick that thing called duration and formalize it into time. And when we did that, the human race changed. The human race, some people like to say the DNA of the human being changed. We're able to internalize time, and we give credit to Newton. But about that same time, while we had this thunder and everybody was awake to the thinking of Newton, time had come into the equation, into our thinking in a formal way. We had new areas of inquiry emerge. That is when what we call today disciplines that define the University of Nairobi, Makerere, Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, and Yale, and Harvard. It's when these disciplines were created. And these disciplines are a problem. They do a lot of good, but they're a problem. It was about the same time that Jeremy Bentham, with his analytical jurisdiction, Montesquieu with balance of power, Emile Durkheim with the social forces acting on the individual, Paul Samuelson early struggles with trying to bring dynamical systems into economics. And all these disciplines being baked in live with us today. At a time when we face a special challenge. The special challenge being the world that Newton framed cannot hold in the situation we face today, what we are calling complexity. That world that Newton framed cannot hold today. And shortly we should see why. Why not? Okay. That was cognitive housekeeping. Now let us start, and we are going to run fast. Tighten your seatbelts. Right, two fundamental questions. Where is it? How hard is it moving? You could cast it this way. Where are we? How hard are we moving? Those are the two questions that define all that we know as human beings. Everything. I mean everything. From the physics of Newton, statistical mechanics, thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, relativity, history, economics, and geography, political science, and sociology, all that we know as human beings reside in those two questions. Where is it? Where are we? How hard are we moving? And those questions frame in a very simple way, in a very beautiful way, that little bracket that you can see. You see F and G? That's it. That's everything. F is what is being carried, maybe carried in us, human beings, and G is the generator. Let me say again, that is all that we know as human beings, resting on that simple bracket. It's called the Poisson bracket. Everything is derived from that. Now, this is our problem. We of the F look into G. We see it. We question it. We try to understand it. And at the same time, G is changing us. Remember the big dig? What happened within a generation? G changes us. And That scenario is outside all that we've gleaned, all that we've extracted from that little expression, F and Y. And that's a problem. That's what, friends, that's what we are calling complexity today. That's it. We'll say a little bit more, but that's it. So, yes, replace it and way. We are not fixed. We change. We read the generator. We change the generator. We're adaptive. We are not getting into the maths. No, that's maybe another time. But the point is, that little bracket is everything, everything, all that we know as human beings. And number 6, we are not fixed. We change. I think that point is taken. Again, you can go back and look at the big dig, and you can look at so many things happening around us. And you begin to ask yourself, now we are celebrating flyovers in Nairobi, whether in Kampala or Accra or Lagos. For how long? We are not fixed. So, the difference between simple and complex systems. In a simple system, the way is fixed. The generator is identifiable. You know what is causing change. In our case, in the case of complex systems, the generator is changing all the time because we change it. And it's changing us. That is a problem. That is a problem we face. All right, infrastructure. In a simple system, the generator is external stable. But infrastructure does the opposite. I've already illustrated with a big dig. Infrastructure changes us. And today, more than 4 decades ago, infrastructure is not just that physical thing. It's not that black asphalt. It's not. In it is woven climate. In it is woven digitalization. In it is woven many things. And it's changing us. And we try to change it. So we don't have a framework. We don't have a framework to handle that scenario. We know enough to know what we don't know. We know enough to know what we don't know. That's the good news. And it is incumbent upon us all to be humble enough to say we don't know. It's wrong to take the delusional landscape, cost-benefit analysis, the view that if you only throw this red meat called infrastructure into this space, public space, what's going to come the other end is good news. And friends, we got to ask ourselves, what caused the unrest in Nairobi? That's very close home now. What caused the unrest in Nairobi? Look back at the ambitious effort of Uhuru and team. Over 10 billion injected. What do you think the people thought would happen? People thought good days ahead. When taxes hit, it is strange. People don't ask it in an explicit way. But people expected better days to come. The problem is infrastructure. This is not what you hear every day. The problem of unrest in Nairobi is infrastructure, our understanding of infrastructure and our communication of infrastructure. That is the problem. It's not picked up that way, but that is the problem. It's not just Nairobi, it's a problem of Africa. And it's going to continue being a problem across our continent. People expect a lot from infrastructure. We don't understand it. The tools we use are delusional. And when the hard time comes, people ask, where are the good times? And why is Africa special? Why are we talking of Africa, not any other place? The state is young. our state is young. How many years? 6 decades, typically. So is the market. The market is just budding. Nairobi is one of the better ones. Nairobi is one of the leaders. But look around Africa, what the concept of the market is just developing. Yet society is old. We're a very old ecosystem. But we're battered by post-independence turmoil, the 70s. And when SAP hit, the late 80s, early 90s, it didn't help because SAP didn't really understand the space. So society is old, but damaged, strained. So when you bring those three together, we have a problem. We don't have what we call a holonomic, something to muzzle the human ecosystem. Like America. America is muzzled by the market. Where is our market to muzzle Africa? Oh, Britain. Britain is muzzled not just by the market, maybe more by the state and the apparatus of the state. Law, language. These are things that make the state strong. So the state is strong. It really doesn't matter who runs it. The same thing applies to America. It doesn't matter who runs it, by the way. They'll do well. That is not our situation. So that is why Africa is special. How do we leap? I'll argue this afternoon, this evening, even this morning, if you're from the United States, that our hope is the serendipity of crisis. Rwanda. Kagame has done commendable job to make sense of crisis. We wasted COVID. But mathematics tells us we have to count on crisis, making use of crisis. That is the big point. All right, I talked about two things, appraisal, just understanding infrastructure and communicating infrastructure. This thing called CPA is a delusion. It is wrong. It is Newtonian. It's just wrong. The world won't collapse because we keep using it. Some of you from rods, we run HDM4 now coming to 5 like it's Bible truth. It's a delusion. It's a delusion. And I chaired a committee that that had developed it a few decades ago. So we have a problem. We have to move to something different. And I'm arguing that we've got to look at infrastructure as an operator. Okay? Something that's acting on the economy, something that's being transformed by us, something that is transforming us, and not this linear static machinery. You throw in some figures and they tell you all that will happen. Right, infrastructure gap, that narrative. I opened with it. I don't think I should say more. I think I've said enough about this infrastructure gap thing. Throw in the red meat called infrastructure and good things will come out the other end. Wrong. Layered operator appraisal. That is the way. There's a paper, you can pick it up somewhere there. That paper comes from nearly a decade of leadership of transport systems, road systems of the world. Yeah, that's a background. I'm not going to get deep into layered operator appraisal. This is not the time. Right, you might pick your phone. Uli Africa. It's a beautiful open platform. A beautiful open platform. Come. Let's make a difference. Let's look into our world. Winnie, Professor, I thank you. Kamau, I thank you. And all participants, I thank you. I urge us to ask. Let's ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fred. I know everybody else is clapping behind the scene there. I can see some hands going up. Thanks a lot. We now get the first respondent, and that is Tom Opio. Tom Opio, you can also give us your reflections on this quite important matter. We are calling it red meat right on. So let's see whether you also see the red meat. Thank you. Tom?
Thank you very much, Professor Mitula, and the IDS team. I'm very grateful to have been invited to be in this seminar. I would also like to thank Fred Amonya.
Your camera, if possible. Your camera, is it working? Just put it on so that
okay.
You are in touch with the team, if you can. If it has a problem,
Yes.
no problem.
Let me see, it should come up.
Okay.
Yeah, but like to thank Professor Amonya for his, I would say, new thinking on infrastructure development, planning and development. I like the idea of that infrastructure is actually influences a lot of things, how the people behave, how the institutions that manage them change, how it changes several other things like land use, and even sometimes the policies. But what I would think, and the new thinking that Prof has brought forward, I had never heard of this. I took my time to read one of his papers, which is quite good, Complexity and Infrastructure in Africa Beyond the Gap Narrative, which I found quite informative. What my response to the issues he has raised, they are very good. And then also the issue of cost-benefit analysis that we have used for quite some time. So he proposes a new framework, which is the layered operator appraisal, which captures much more than what the CBA analysis does. It considers the people, it considers the state, or rather the society, the state, and also the market that the infrastructure is functioning. And while that is quite fully encompassing, the cost-benefit analysis, I've used it for quite a number of projects. It mainly deals with the engineering and economics. But what I know is that in the HDM4, there are other modules there that try to account for other let me say, other aspects beyond the environment, beyond the engineering and economics. And that's why it is good to also bring in other criteria, what we normally call the multi-criteria analysis. And in Kenya, what we have done when we came up with the planning, the infrastructure, the roads investment program, we actually gave weight to the various components that would not fully catering for the markets and the people and all that, but we brought in aspects where it was not only based on economics and engineering, but there were weights that were given to other social and environmental factors that happen within the society. So it is possible to model or use the CBA to at least model parts of what layered operator appraisal does, but not fully. So I like this new approach that Prof is proposing. One other thing that I know that the layered operator appraisal approach with framework will capture very well is the issue of outcomes and long-term impacts. Sometimes what you find is that we as governments and institutions, we tend to focus too much on the inputs and the outputs. If you go to an institution, they'll tell you how many kilometers they have built, but they will not tell you how those many kilometers of road they have built have impacted on the people or on the society. And what I have argued all the time is that what they should be telling us is, yes, you have built 10,000 kilometers over the last 10 years or 5 years. How has it impacted on the people, on the society? How has it influenced the market? How has it influenced how we do our things? That is often missing because it is sometimes very difficult for them. Not really difficult, they don't want sometimes to do it because it is too much effort, which they don't want to put in. But it is possible. And the problem why they don't have that information is let me talk about Kenya and maybe some other African countries, we don't like to collect data, to have data that will inform future decisions. We like to build the roads or even airports, and we don't monitor. So that is why it is. And sometimes the indicators that would give you whether it has an impact on the people or the society are never quite clearly identified at the planning stage. And the prioritization of what we do, the infrastructure that we do not take into account those outcomes and impacts. We use a simple economic and engineering criteria to prioritize the projects that we do. And that is not correct. And that's why I think the framework that is being proposed by Prof would be quite useful if it can be developed such that it is not as complicated as what I read. It was quite complicated when I read the first paper and I saw several questions and all sorts of things. I said, oh my God. So, but what I know is that the questions that are there can be programmed like what we have in HDM4, such that the governments and our African countries can actually don't have to think about the very complicated formulas behind the scenes, but our inputs. We can get the inputs and then the computer or the softwares can actually use that input if they are correct to give us the right decisions. Now, if I still have some time, I would like to just say a few words on infrastructure development. In my view, maybe the next 2-3 minutes. I think the infrastructure planning and development in our countries in Africa is not done properly. You may find that we have very disaggregated planning frameworks. For example, you'll find the roads people are planning their road development alone. The airports are also planning their infrastructure separately. The railways, the pipeline, all these are discrete. But what we should be thinking about is what I would call a multimodal planning framework, where we look at the transport sector, for example, as a whole, and see how we can actually we plan together and then implement the projects or the programs as packages, where once you finish a package, you'll have delivered everything, which means if, say, you are doing the Northern Corridor in Kenya, you should be looking at what other airports or other transport facilities need to be developed as we do for example, now we are doing the expressway from Rironi to somewhere. There are other investments that could actually make that infrastructure have major outcomes to our people. So I would like to think of multimodal transport planning or infrastructure planning. And for transport infrastructure, we should be thinking about more of a corridor development. Yeah. And because once we do a corridor development and we have multimodal transport planning, we will be able to have seamless connectivity, which is what we need to have so that it has impacts on the society and the markets. And then one other last thing I wanted to say is that we need to have very strong monitoring and evaluation frameworks that clearly states what the inputs, outputs, outcomes, and long-term impacts are. Because if we just concentrate on the inputs and outputs, we are limiting our analysis. we need to say, what tangible benefits does the society get? What tangible benefits does the country get? What other benefits beyond just building several kilometers of rail do we get? And I think we also need to have strong institutions with capacities to actually plan and manage infrastructure in Africa. Thank you very much. I hope I have not gone beyond the 10 minutes. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent, Tom. Thank you so much. And it's like it was planned, but not, because you are already highlighting issues of corridor development, multimodal infrastructure planning, and we are having a planner follow engineers in this discussion. So we hope Kasuku will be able to quite blend in so that the entire process is closed. Kasuku, Sylvester, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
The discussion. Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, very clearly.
Yes, thank you very much. And I've liked Professor Amonya's, perspectives and equally the intervention made by my friend, Engineer Tom Odago. And I must thank IDS for convening this particular webinar. And as an infrastructure planner, and as a person who is a practitioner both in the field of academics and also public sector policy leadership, I'm going to download Professor Amonya's vision of the layered operator appraisal so that I can talk to the language where if we were now to be talking to government, what are we expecting to be telling government? What are the people going to hear from Professor Amonya's intervention, in which now we are supposed to model development systems going forward, particularly with giving very strong attention to infrastructure as a key driver of the economy. There are a few issues to appreciate here that we know Africa. When we talk about Africa, Africa has a number of characteristics that are also very interesting when you compare it to other subcontinents or when you compare it to other continents. Just like you talk about China or India or any other part of the world, which is very close to population, Africa is currently boasting of close to 1.4 billion population. And when we are talking about this population, by the time we get to the year 2050, which I think is very close, we are talking about Africa having increased to about 2.5 billion people. And when we look at other statistics accounting for this particular population, 40% of actually population growth in the world is going to be occurring in this area. So when we are talking about Africa and the complexity of infrastructure, population is indeed at the center of this, because without population, then we wouldn't even be talking about infrastructure. When we look at urbanization, because every part of the world that we look at, some of the most intriguing developments that we see and discuss, and even what Professor Amonya will be talking about from Birmingham, is the real position of urbanization in any part of the world. And Africa today is talking about 600 million people in urban areas, and by the year 2050, it's talking about 1.5 billion people. And looking at this particular growth, the most rapid growth around the world's urban population is actually going to be occurring in Africa. So this is a very current discussion. And the matters of these demographic shifts are actually driving unprecedented demand for infrastructure, whether you're talking about transport, housing, energy, water, sanitation, among many other things, including digital systems. And that is one thing that we cannot leave behind. Coming to the key platform for today's discussion is that yet these infrastructure gaps remain severe in Africa. And Professor Amonya has talked about that gap of about close to 170 billion or so. And when we are talking about the financing gap itself, we are talking about 108 billion per year, according to the African Development Bank. And when we look at infrastructure as a key foundation for economic transformation in Africa, as already espoused by Engineer Tom Opeo, is that maybe there is a tendency of looking at these things from a silo perspective. But we need to look at infrastructure from a perspective of a systems within a system, or a system in its own right, which also has subsystems, which are systems in their own right. And that brings out the layered operator framework if I download it now as a policy expert. And what are we talking about here? We are talking about infrastructure, not just being a physical construction, but it is also the backbone of productivity, trade, social well-being, among many other things. And we do know that reliable electricity powers industries, transportation networks, enable markets, water systems, can actually sustain health, and digital connectivity also supports innovation. The World Bank does opine that when these infrastructure systems are looked at from an integrated perspective, then these are what now inform a trajectory of a society or society's advancement. And just to bring in a focus on some of the areas that are actually bedeviling Africa, because the big questions have been, why is Africa not even industrializing despite its human capital, the immense human capital, despite all the resources that you find within the African continent? Those who understand the key energizers of development, or the enablers, are saying that energy deficits actually illustrate the scale of the challenge in Africa. Over 600 million Africans lack access to electricity. You can imagine, out of the 1.4 billion, over 600 million are lacking access to electricity, which is actually accounting more than 80% of the global electricity access gap, according to the International Energy Agency. When we look around this, then around 900 million people also lack clean cooking solutions. And so when we talk about the burden that brings on health, particularly when it comes to greenhouse gaseous emissions and their attendant impacts. And I did complete a research in the year 2024 and with some publications in journals that did show how pollution, whether you combine traffic pollution among many other, pollutants within the urban area, and how they impact on the population, you realize that the impact is actually immense, and it is increasing with the time. When we look at some of the intricacies in infrastructure in Africa, we realize that transport constraints are equally significant. Logistics costs in Africa actually account for between more than 30 to 40% of the cost of products on the shelves when you are talking about Africa. But you realize that when you compare these to other jurisdictions like industrialized nations or economies that have moved forward like China and the others, this only accounts for about 10%. So the competitiveness of Africa also now still comes into question, thereby deepening the complexity of infrastructure, issue in the continent. And we also realize that rail transportation in Africa, whereas it is thought that it is one of the most effective in economic development, in Africa it's only accounts for less than about 5% when it is more than 10% in many other jurisdictions. Matters digital connectivity, because infrastructure is not just, as was already said, that it's not just about the road, or it's not just a single item, but it is complex. It is multidimensional. That digital connectivity shows that there is a big promise in bridging the inequality gap in Africa. And there is a figure of about 650 million mobile subscribers in Africa, and which actually caters for about 70% of global mobile money transfers on these same platforms. But at the same time, with that boasting, over 300 million people still remain outside the mobile, broadband coverage in Africa, according to the GSMA and the World Bank statistics. So when we come to regional integration, Because infrastructure unto its own self is not important to a country or a region or a continent or even the globe. But when we talk about how infrastructure creates an interplay in a bigger environment, when you consider issues of regional integration, industrialization, imperatives, among many other things, so that we can look at this layered operator appraisal and how it downloads into an economy within the continent or the region or the country, we realize that that infrastructure is actually central to Africa's structural transformation and regional integration. We do note that at the moment, manufacturing caters for about 10 to 12% within the continent's GDP, when it is actually more than 20% in other jurisdictions. And poor infrastructure remains to be the continent's bane. It remains to be the continent's big pain going forward. When we look at how this plays out in the African continental trade area, we realize that Africa, with its great population, is barely trading with itself, between 16 and 18%. But you realize that other jurisdictions are actually doing more than 50%. So because of this infrastructure issue, so it is not just about infrastructure unto its own self, but how infrastructure equally affects the overall economy. And we also know about landlocked countries. The other day we heard about Uganda saying that they must have access to the sea and they are ready to go to war. So Uganda is among the 16 countries that are lacking direct access to the sea, and whose transport costs can actually be up to 50% when you consider inland movement. The other bit that is very core to infrastructure complexity is the issue of governance, financing, and the challenges around institutions. We realize that infrastructure outcomes actually depend as much on governance as just as it does to finance. That Professor Moje says that it is just not about the numbers in terms of financing gap, but the institutional embodiment that actually deals with the guidance framework for moving a country or a continent forward that also rests on governance systems. And Africa actually invests just about 4% of its GDP on infrastructure. But when you compare this now to other jurisdictions, you realize that them, like China, when it was first developing and revolutionizing its economy, they were spending about 14% of their GDP on infrastructure. When you look at public investments in terms of inefficiencies, we need to note that it can actually reduce the value of growth by about 30 to 40%. In the elements of inefficiencies in that economy. But meanwhile, we realize that domestic capital also remains underutilized in the continent. But of greatest interest within this complexity is that the institutional assets actually exceed $350 billion, but just a small portion is applied to infrastructure. But when you look at the outflows, because the deficit in Africa, as I did say before, is about $108 billion. But when you look at illegal outflows out of Africa, there is a general figure of between 88 and $90 billion that is flowing out of Africa. So, and this is almost equaling the deficit that we see in the continent. So what about if we had a sense of great governance surrounding financial management, financial deployment, or in the financial resource deployment towards infrastructure? We would actually be still finding ways of bridging the gap. And as I did say, that matters climate change are equally very important, and looking at resilience within the urban environment is very key. When we look at the human capital, because this is also very important within the complexity, is that infrastructure investments are also powerful engines for employment. And while we need to see how best we can tackle this, we realize that Africa's workforce is actually projected to grow to over 800 million people by the year 2050. But unemployment still remains one of the biggest problems. And spatial inequalities actually remain stuck with more than 70% of the rural African population lacking access to energy, which thereby continue to compound their underemployment issues. So how therefore do we move? Engineer Tomodago has talked about integration. How therefore do we move from fragmentation that also the professor talked about, and then we look at strategic imperatives in terms of directions. We need to consider a number of issues here. For example, we need to look at strategic positions as a regional gateway, of which Kenya has always been said to be a hub. When we look at Kenya's, being a primary logistics hub, financial hub, transport hub, linking the region and to the global market. We also look at the countries serving other landlocked countries, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, Sudan, South Sudan, among many others. As well as when we look at high public investments against the rising, pressure, again, we need to see how best we can increase Kenya's invested infrastructure share to average about 7 to 8% of GDP in the local market here. And this, of course, has to have a play within the fiscal constants, like when we are talking about debt sustainability, among many other things. We also need to look at the strengths that we are having in our energy sector, like a continental strength with still with the remaining gaps. We know that we are currently in Kenya, we are having the high energy, production levels, for example, coming from the renewable energy. But when you look at the region, you'll realize that there's quite an underperformance. But this can also have a major play when we look at the challenges of affordability in terms of transmission costs and reliability in remote regions. On transport and logistics, the port, despite Mombasa Port doing tonnages like 35 million tons, but we also realize that there are still issues of congestion, among many other things. The SGR well has been constructed, but you realize that there is a slowness in terms of integrating with the other countries so that they can also come into play, because countries are looking at their infrastructure individually rather than from a bigger platform of a regional connectivity. I want to wrap this up by saying that we need to look at infrastructure as Africa's destiny. And in infrastructure being Africa's destiny, we are looking at Africa's future competitiveness, prosperity, and stability, depending on building integrated, resilient, and inclusive infrastructural systems for the continent. And what are some of the key takeaways that we need to deal with going forward? We need to deal with adopting integrated systems in planning, as was already said by Engineer Tomodago. We need to strengthen institutional capacity. And during the review of the 10-year infrastructure decade under UNCTAD in the 80s, it was realized that some of the biggest challenges in African infrastructure was actually weak institutional systems, coupled with the financial inadequacies in terms of resources, as well as lack of ownership. So when we look at strengthening institutional capacity, then it also brings in many other governance issues. We also need to mobilize sustainable financing, both looking at what Kenya is doing today by establishing an infrastructure fund. But of course, that is not the only instrument. There are many other instruments, considering that we are even having a devolved system framework. How do you therefore finance the infrastructure development at the local level, tied to the national level, and also linking to the regional and continental level, particularly when we talk about Africa Agenda 2063, when we talk about the IGAD Infrastructure Master Plan, when we talk about the Integrate Africa Plan. We are talking about promoting, therefore, regional cooperation in that endeavor, and also building resilience in infrastructure for it to be inclusive. Just to make sure that I leave you in a better place under this layered operator appraisal, we need to look at having shifts. We shift to integrated planning frameworks, as I've already said. So some of the key focal areas, if we look at Kenya, is developing a metropolitan mass rapid transit systems. For example, when we studied traffic congestion in Nairobi, we realized that people are spending as much as 2 to 3 hours on sections of highways where they actually need to spend 20 minutes or less. Today I was in a meeting at a very high level, and somebody spent over 2 hours for a distance that he was supposed to spend 20 minutes, and he came late for the meeting, and a very important meeting for that matter. And he said, I couldn't move. And these are critical issues, putting more credence to the complexity. We need to strengthen regional connectivity. We need to expand many other infrastructural services depth within the economy. We need to mobilize domestic capital. We need to build climate resilience. We need to promote secondary cities. And we need to make sure that we base success on governance reforms and sustainable systems going forward. Thank you. I know I've taken 10 minutes or thereabout.
Thank you, Kasuku. That was quite interesting. And all participants, you realize that these are two converging, different from different platforms, but quite the ideas are converging, because we have heard from a typical academia, of course, working also with practice a bit, and then the private, sector person engaged with the topic again. There is quite convergence of this layered operator appraisal is a good thing. I think where the debate lies is whether we can do it, because it's complex. For one to achieve an layered operator appraisal, it takes resources, it takes money, it takes committed institutions. And we are hearing Dr. Kasuku telling us that institutional governance is a challenge. Which is continually being faced by our public sector. So again, as we if we were to embrace the layered operator appraisal, Storm has also told us very clearly that the cost-benefit analysis is what is on table, but less of the layered. But what does it take to effect this? I hope, Kasuku, you will have 1 minute later on to just tell us, after Amonya has also responded a bit to your voices, then we can open it to the public. So Fred, just 1 minute or two, Fred, just 1 minute or two, or your observation of the layered approach vis-a-vis cost-benefit analysis and the institutional challenges that face literally each and every country. There is no country that lacks these challenges of institutional issues and governance. And yet there is a good system that can capture not just the hard infrastructure, but also the needs of the people. The issue is infrastructure serving the needs of the people? And how do we make infrastructure effectively serve our needs? Fred?
It's not. Infrastructure is not serving our needs. But let me start with Dr. Kasoko. You see, I met Sylvester, and I think he may have forgotten this, at Chatham House, London. Those are days when I was running around leading PIACs, whatever, transport systems economics. Now, I want you to ponder. I was able to meet him at Chatham House, London. Can we have our domestic money pools? Can we have our circles? Can we have our NSSF effectively engage with international money? I want you to think carefully about that. We talked about the devolved government. That is a brilliant thing, Kenya leads. Can we come to a point where Anyang' Nyong'o's Kisumu is able to effectively engage international money and spread that across Africa, so that we have the devolved governments engaging international money and domestic money pools doing alike, not just having our good friend Dr. Sylvester Kasuku at Chatham House. Next time, can we have these people come and engage the world? That's a big one. I would like you to think about it. Two, let me talk about, let me respond quickly to our friend, Engineer Pio, and this CBA. The thing is, understanding what is wrong with CBA takes deep reflection. Let me put it this way. You can have a machinery, you throw in some stuff, it gives you whatever you want. You can play around with the configuration of that machinery and you get it working. What we are saying is that the machinery itself, the whole thing needs to change. You see that? So whether you're talking about scenario analysis, you're talking about MCA, multi-criteria analysis, as long as you're applying it to that static machinery, it is a delusion. And CBA is a delusion. And let me conclude by saying that it came up as a good thing. It only came up recently. It's only Robert McNamara who brought up CBA. The thing had started in the 40s, but it's really Robert McNamara, World Bank, coming from the Rand, who brought up CBA to where we are now. So, friends, let's not wait for the World Bank. Let's not wait for any Muzungu University to do it for us. We have to take on the challenge of reality. We've got to find out what truth is. We've got to tackle reality and understand infrastructure. I think let me leave it there. I would rather I love to hear more questions coming from the audience than I bellowing stuff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we want to really open it to the audience. It's usually unfortunate that you can run such a wonderful, discussion and then you leave with the panel and the moderator. It's terrible. So Wanja, I can see Wanja's hand up. Douglas Wanja, go ahead. Wanja? Douglas? Could you unmute and go ahead?
Yes, I've unmuted. I don't know whether you're able to hear me now.
Yes, now I can hear you.
Yeah, so thank you so much and for this session and also for IDS for convening such a forum and also for Prof. Amonya and great contribution also from Dr. Kasuku. I think my question as an economist then when it comes to infrastructure development is, I think, Fred, I would like you maybe to reflect on this. Of course, law sounds very a big solution when it comes to CBA model. But now, let me ask the question of what other behavioral models maybe that can complement this? Because when it comes to infrastructure development, I think we have forgotten that citizens also now are no longer rational, but they also behave in more psychological ways. You build them a road they don't want to use, those kind of things. So what other behavioral models maybe do you foresee complementing your law that is very important? And the other question that I want you to ask is that we have seen a different approach for government when it comes now to funding infrastructure development. And most of the governments, I could use the word hiding in PPPs, other than just going to use other avenues to fund infrastructure development. So maybe the question on that is, how will law, for example, integrate such funding trends that we see nowadays? Most of the governments, you hear like our president saying, these are PPP projects, citizens will not pay anything. These are PPP projects, so it's not using your money. To what extent that you integrate into a model, also bearing in mind that PPPs are projects where the government can also escape from fiscal prudence. I think that is, and then the last question is when you talk about infrastructural gap, and I like that part, you're saying that there are so many gaps that we have in the continent. So the question then is, have you also, maybe in your model, have you also maybe seen that most of the governments would like to perpetuate infrastructure gaps so that they can also be called for getting resources continually? So where they always get money, but they misdirect the money to use in other areas to perpetuate always that gap for infrastructure. Thank you so much, Prof, for that opportunity.
Let's get more. Kasuku be on the alert on that, whether government perpetuate the gap or not, at least, and that will be very rapid response because we are almost running out of time. But let's get more. Basil, help me if you are seeing any hand which I can't see, or the team, Chasaina, I can't see anybody or anything on the chat that is, being raised. I know the team can also see the chat.
Raphael, I don't know whether you want, Paul Odhiambo's hand is up. Paul,
Okay,
please.
Paul, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Prof, and also thank you for the nice presentation from Professor, and also for the discussant. I just have one observation. Again, when you look at infrastructure, a number of times in our situation, a lot tend to rotate or revolve around the cities or major towns or urban centers. But you look at our countries, like for example, we talk about Kenya, where we have sometimes sparsely populated regions like the ASALs, these semi-arid and arid lands, where the population is very much scattered. And then you are talking about the population, especially where you have pastoralist communities that move, which is a strategy for survival. They're looking for water here. So when a government intervenes in terms of constructing infrastructure, whichever model we use there, so does even the issue of cost come in, because you are trying to open up these areas, but the communities or where the economic activities are situated are sparsely populated, unlike the cities which are more concentrated. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Raphael, you want to just recap what you have put in the chat very briefly, because they have read it, I hope. Raphael Idimuli, Dr. Idimuli.
Thank you, Prof. I love what Prof has actually said in terms of delusions, and I pointed out in disciplines as being as in being a delusional kind of it's a lie or something, if I just for a lack of a better word, and CBAs, which has been pointed out. So I'm just wondering where that is it now that the concept this has integrated into our concepts, the cost and benefits we hear. Even when I had the speakers speak, they talked of language of economics and benefits and all that in their analysis, even in terms of these are practitioners that are using these languages. And he also Prof talked about as in terms of the gap, understanding infrastructure and communication as one of the gaps. I wonder, as in now, do we need to revise our language and do away with the disciplines? And is this approach that is now has been Prof is trying to suggest to us, as in not being familiar with it, but is governance the main key? Because I heard of a state, the states as in mentioned of UK and the states that even without leadership, proper leadership, everything stands. So is it a governance issue, or that explains complexity of infrastructure provision? Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. 2 minutes for Fred, 1 minute for Kasuku, 2 minutes for Tom, and then we move on. And Basili will tell us when we have to close. I have a monitor here who can just decide to push us out. Fred, go ahead.
You might agree with me that first, these are brilliant questions. Perhaps the only way we can do justice to these questions is, for me and our fine discussants, to come back and engage with us all. And Uli might just be that platform. I want us to think carefully, because there is no way I'm going to address these fine questions now. And yet they must be addressed. I can pick one. Let me just run through in seconds. Disciplines, academic disciplines and narratives. Wow, that is a deep area. I would love to see a good graduate student take it up. That is really deep, Winnie.
Yeah.
Now, you move on to Mr. Odhiambo, talking about equity of infrastructure, sparsely populated areas. How do you approach it? You see how deep it is? Okay. I'm just appreciating the questions. Number one, Mr. Wanja, and funding, first PPP. PPP is a problem of our time. We've hardly used PPP incidentally. What the concept should be was lost as it moved from this country, England, where it really started this wave, to IPPF. at the World Bank and then to Africa. The deeper concept of trying to understand infrastructure as a sociological challenge, that is how it started. That was lost. It became a transaction, erect a tall wall, we call it bankability. And nobody wants to think about the social return on infrastructure. It's all about bankability. Erect a tall wall, and that's it. That's all the money people are interested in. That has to change. Look, I haven't answered those questions. I cannot, but we've got a platform that can allow us address those questions in full and a long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We go to Tom, then we'll come to Kasuku later. Tom, if you have any observations to make either on the discussant or on the general discussion and the questions being raised, especially this one of ASAL areas. I know you've worked a lot also in these ASAL areas. You are putting roads there, and somebody's asking whether this is worth the investment. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, let me take that one. I know we don't have much time.
Yeah.
I'll give an example. I happen to be one of the project managers for the Isiolo to Moyale Road, some 550 kilometers. That was completely, it could take 5 days to get from Moyale to Isiolo on a truck, and that truck would carry everything: animals, human beings, products, and all those. And when we went there to appraise that road, I was working at African Development Bank that time, and I had my boss, and we stood at Isiolo, and I asked him, are you sure, boss, that we should put African Development money on this thing? Yeah. EU had been there for several appraisals, and they never built it. Then what we did, we said, okay, let's take the risk. We take 121 kilometers. And then people will get interested. Anyway, to cut the long story short, the person who asked that question should go there now. Insecurity disappeared. Land value increased. There's a lot of development. Now you can even go there on a VIT, and it will take you quite a short time. The transformation that it has done is incredible. More than what the cost-benefit analysis, which you are trying to cobble to get the road onto the portfolio was. So I agree, there is much more that we need to look at beyond the immediate benefits of a road. So I think that is it, but it is worth the investment to put money in the assets for them to
Excellent. Throwing the meat has worked. Throwing the meat as in the concept of ammonia has worked for Moyale, Isiolo pastoralists. Thank you. Kasuku, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And we have a lot of convergence on this. Professor Monya, Engineer Tom Odago, and actually I also worked on the Isiolo to Moyale Road. And I happened also to be the boss of the LAPSET corridor as Director General. And I can tell you there is more to financial viability of projects, of that nature. And I equally boarded a lorry with cows down there and bags of beans when we had a breakdown in our vehicle. Now, yes, I've met Professor before, and of course, I've also met Professor Kerali, and the person I haven't met of the HDM4 team is Dr. Doki. And these systems actually also have a lot of relevance, and it depends on how they are handled. I remember when I handled the Emali-Loitoktok road, TRRL indicated that the viability of that road was about 7.2%. But 2 years later, when we ran a HDM4 and we included a number of exogenous factors, which had localized the modeling, we actually achieved a higher, a higher rate, which actually enabled Badea now to come on board to finance that road. Matters financial viability versus versus social provisioning has been canvassed, but how do we integrate funding into infrastructure PPPs? Currently, we have a PPP secretariat, and we are trying to undertake PPP investments. I know it really takes time to prepare projects, and again, at the same time, bankability of projects is also what is stopping a number of private sector players to come on board. And when you start telling them to go and run models to find out whether the project is viable or not, I mean, you are telling private sector to go and sink money where they are not going to get returns. So countries actually need, therefore, to prepare projects to show at least a sense of viability, even if there are social aspects to be met by projects, as we have said of the Northern Kenya roads. So those gaps are real. And I can talk about political cycle also affecting delivery of projects, because it was said, what are some of those pressures that is affecting? Is government also trying to create bottlenecks? What I can say is that the political pressures also affect delivery of projects. And when we went to meet Narendra Modi before he became prime minister, that time he was chief minister, and we had a discussion with him at his home in Gandhinagar. He did tell us that as a leader, he actually championed preparation of projects for private sector to come on board. So even when he was meeting his political demands of his office, but he equally presented a national need on the platform of developing his particular state. And actually that is what gave him the advantage now to be elected prime minister, because considering that his party was not even a majority party. But the Indians said, if Narendra Modi can do it in Gujarat, then he can also do a greater job in the bigger India. So what I can say is that there are many ways in which we can meet requirements for infrastructure financing. And as Professor Moja said, can we have a Anyang' Nyong'o leading in Kisumu by providing financing for his projects? The metropolitan financing instruments do exist. And actually, the faster we can domesticate them within the continent, now that many jurisdictions in the continent are actually coming of age, we would actually be meeting a lot of objectives going forward. As already said, we need maybe a bigger debate on a later date, and I will be available. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My last voice will be from Professor Kamau, just after I briefly say something so that he gives us a last word as he gave us a welcoming remarks to the IDS seminar. But I really want to thank all of you. This is a very, very active engagement that we cannot keep. As Amonya says, the debate will continue. And in any case, there is convergence. The issue is how to achieve that convergence, that the layered operator appraisal is a good thing. And I think Tom did mention about monitoring and evaluation. And sometimes I do ask, when we monitor and evaluate, what does that data say? And what do we do with that data as scholars, as government, as private people? What do we do with what M&E says? Because I'm sure M&E has told us a lot of things that could be embedded in the layered operator appraisal. So let me hand it over to Paul Kamau. He's still here with us. Thank you very much. Professor Paul Kamau, just say any little word you'd wish to say, and then just give us a shorting part. We are running over by 6 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, all. Thank you, Winnie, for coordinating this very ably. Thank you, Prof. Amonya, Dr. Kasuku, and Engineer Opio, for your great insight and for allowing yourself to share with us what you really practice and know and have been working on. It's really informative and insightful, and even to see how the discussion from engineering can be embedded in our discussion of social sector in terms of development. And indeed, everybody who has had a chance to speak or even to ask a question. This is one debate that we cannot exhaust in 1.5 hours. And I think Professor Amonya mentioned this at the beginning, that we might just be scratching the surface. And the more we are able to integrate and discuss this matter, perhaps they're going to be more enlightening. We will be able to tease out what parts of this complicated or complex system can be handled at our level. And I like the question from the discussant that, well, it's good to have what we have or what we can do from for lack of a better word, theoretical point of view. But if we were given now a task that you have the government here, you have the African Union, what do we tell them? Or what would we say is the low-hanging fruit, a short-term measure, is a mid-term measurement, or even long-term intervention? Because as they say, even Rome was never made in one day, but we need to see those baby steps coming in and trying to move things, and that we can see some progress. So from the Uli network, which is the basis for this connection between IDS, University of Birmingham, and other African universities, which is led by Prof. Amonya and Professor Winnie, we will be teasing out some of this debate. What Prof. Amonya you have opened today is a whole world where we can think about different areas of infrastructure that we might need to get deeper and into more analytical beyond now talking of infrastructure in general. So I believe that we are going to organize some more seminars, some more engagement. And as I said at the beginning, we normally have these seminars on bi-weekly. So there will be one coming out maybe in the next 2 weeks. And we'll see, so that we don't lose momentum on Africa and infrastructure, how soon can we bring the second series of this infrastructure? I'm happy to hear that our discussant today, Dr. Sylvester Kasuku and Engineer Tom Opio, are also offering that we can also be part of this conversation. And it's good to hear, especially for those of us in Kenya, hearing about the practical element of infrastructure. I like that when we were hearing very practical cases of roads that have been on or that are being developed, and how assessment and appraisal would bring different results. But when you have a modulated approach, then the viability of the project improve. So it's not to look at single infrastructure, but to look at it in a coherent or in a more holistic way, so that we can improve on this. So thank you very, very much. I think we can bring this to a close now. A time for us to reflect to what our able speakers have done this afternoon, this morning, or this evening, and to see what is my role. Winnie said at the beginning, am I the infrastructure, or infrastructure is just those things that are out there? But every morning, every day, we need infrastructure for our livelihood. So we may not be able to do without. So what role can we play? Irrespective of our disciplines, can we make a contribution to this very important debate? So with that, I want to thank all of you for attending this session, and to say that be on lookout for our next seminar series. And if you're there, you have a presentation, you'd like to use IDS as a platform, we're able to bring together many audience or big audience, and we are open. Just link up with us. I'm sure Pascaline has already provided the email address for which you can reach out, so that we can schedule your seminar or your presentation at any given time. But we preserve Thursday afternoon as the time for our seminars. So thank you very much all for this great discussion of our opening year, and we will be back with more, better, and highly engaging session the year rolls out. Thank you. Thank you very much. We can now adjourn.
Thank you, everybody. We can see.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.